When Steph Curry walked into one of the most expensive galas in San Francisco wearing a gray hoodie and white sneakers, the host of the event did something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He grabbed the microphone, he looked Steph up and down, and in front of over 400 of the richest, most powerful people in the Bay Area, he laughed at him. He made joke after joke after joke about the hoodie, about the sneakers, about how the greatest shooter in NBA history looked like he had gotten lost on his way to a pickup game at the park. The room laughed. Some people looked away. Some people shook their heads. But nobody said a word. Nobody stood up for Steph. And Steph just sat there, quiet, still, with tired eyes and folded hands and a look on his face that nobody in that room could quite understand. But here is what that host did not know. There was a reason Steph Curry was wearing that hoodie. There was a reason he showed up an hour late. There was a reason his eyes were red and his voice was heavy and his hands would not stop shaking. He had come straight from a hospital room, a room where a 9-year-old boy with cancer had looked up at him and asked a question so heartbreaking that it would bring every single person in that ballroom to tears before the night was over. And when Steph finally stood up, when he asked for the microphone, when he reached into the pocket of that hoodie and pulled out a single folded check, the room did not just go quiet, it shattered. The host, the man who had spent 30 minutes mocking him, dropped to his knees in tears. Guests who had spent the evening sipping champagne and admiring their own jewelry started writing checks so fast that the organizers could not keep up. And by the end of the night, something happened that had never happened in 12 years of this gala, something that no one saw coming. Something that started with a gray hoodie and ended with a moment so powerful that the people who were there still cannot talk about it without crying. But I cannot tell you what that moment was. Not yet. Because to understand why it mattered to truly feel the weight of what Steph Curry did that night, you need to hear the whole story. From the very beginning. From the man who threw the party to the boy who changed everything. So stay with me. Watch this all the way to the end. Because I promise you, what happens in the final minutes of this story is something you will never forget. It all started with a man named Vernon Ashcroft. The ballroom went quiet. Not the kind of quiet where people whisper behind their hands. Not the polite kind where someone coughs softly into a napkin. This was something different. This was the deep, heavy, pressing kind of silence. The kind that crawls under your skin and makes your chest feel tight. The kind that makes you hold your breath without even knowing you are doing it. Over 400 guests sat frozen in their velvet chairs inside the grand pavilion of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. Crystal glasses hung in midair, halfway between the table and someone's lips. Forks stopped moving. Jaws stopped chewing. Even the waiters, dressed in crisp white shirts and black vests, stood perfectly still. Their silver trays balanced on trembling hands, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. At the center of the stage, standing behind a tall wooden podium decorated with white roses and golden ribbons, was a man in a simple gray hoodie and clean white sneakers. He looked out of place in this room full of tuxedos and evening gowns and diamonds that sparkled under the massive chandelier above. His name was Stephen Curry. Most people called him Steph. The world knew him as the greatest three-point shooter in NBA history, the man who changed the game of basketball forever, the man who led the Golden State Warriors to 4 NBA championships, the man who won 2 MVP awards, the man whose jersey hung in arenas and whose poster hung in the bedrooms of millions of kids around the world. But tonight, in this golden ballroom, nobody was thinking about basketball. Nobody was thinking about three-pointers or championships or MVP trophies. They were thinking about the number. The giant screen behind Steph glowed bright, and on that screen, in bold white letters tall enough for every single person in the room to read, was a number that made the air disappear from the room. $1,000 million. Donated in a single sentence, spoken in a calm, steady voice, without bragging, without showing off, without even raising his hand for applause. And standing just 6 feet away, gripping the edge of the podium so hard that his knuckles had turned bone white, was the man who had spent the last 30 minutes making fun of Steph Curry in front of every single person in this room. His name was Vernon Ashcroft. He was the host of the gala. He was the man who ran the show, the man who always had something clever to say, the man whose voice had filled this room with laughter and jokes all evening long. But right now, Vernon Ashcroft had no words. His face had changed 3 colors in 5 seconds. First red, like a man caught doing something he should not have been doing. Then white, like a man who just realized the size of his mistake. Then a pale, sickly gray, like a man watching his reputation crack apart like thin ice under heavy boots. His mouth hung open. His perfect silver hair, usually swept back with expensive gel, had fallen across his forehead. His Patek Philippe watch, worth more than most people's houses, suddenly looked very small and very silly on his wrist. No clever words came out, no jokes, no smirks, no charming one-liners. Just silence. The same silence that now filled the grand pavilion from floor to ceiling, wall to wall, corner to corner. a silence so thick you could almost reach out and touch it. But here is the part that most people do not know. Here is the piece of this story that never made it into the headlines or the social media posts or the whispered gossip that spread across San Francisco in the days that followed. There was a reason Steph Curry showed up in a hoodie that night. There was a reason he arrived nearly an hour late. There was a reason his eyes looked heavy and tired, with dark circles underneath them, like bruises. A reason his voice cracked just slightly when he spoke into the microphone. A reason his hands trembled when he unfolded that check. And when that reason finally came to light, when the truth spilled out under the golden glow of that chandelier, Vernon Ashcroft did not just go silent. He did not just stand there. He did not just feel embarrassed. Vernon Ashcroft, the man in the $10,000 Brioni tuxedo, the man who owned half the buildings in Pacific Heights, the man who had hosted this gala for 11 straight years and never once shed a tear in public, that man pressed both hands over his face and cried like a child. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand why that moment mattered, to truly feel the weight of what happened in this room, we need to go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the invitation that started it all. Back to the man who believed that the clothes on your body told the world who you were. And back to the man who proved with one quiet act of love that the only thing that truly tells the world who you are is the size of your heart. This is that story. Vernon Ashcroft was not a bad man. At least that is what he told himself every morning when he looked in the mirror. He would straighten his tie, smooth down his silver hair, and remind himself that he was one of the most generous people in San Francisco. He sat on the boards of 3 different charities. He had raised millions of dollars for children and hospitals and schools over the years. His name was carved into plaques on the walls of buildings all across the city. Surely a man like that could not be bad. But Vernon had a problem he did not even know he had. A problem that lived so deep inside him that it had become part of who he was, like the color of his eyes or the sound of his voice. Vernon Ashcroft believed that the outside of a person told you everything you needed to know about the inside. He was 56 years old. He had been born into money. His father, Gerald Ashcroft, had built a real estate empire in the 1970s, buying up apartment buildings and office towers all across the Bay Area when the prices were low and the city was still growing. By the time Vernon took over the business in 1998, the Ashcroft name was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Vernon grew up in a mansion on Broadway Street in Pacific Heights, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America. He went to private schools where the boys wore blazers and the girls wore pleated skirts. He attended Stanford University, where he studied business and joined a fraternity that only accepted members from families worth more than $10 million. Everything in Vernon's life had taught him the same lesson. Appearance is everything. How you look is who you are. The suit makes the man. And so Vernon dressed like a king every single day. His closet was the size of most people's living rooms. It held 42 suits, 18 pairs of Italian leather shoes, 9 tuxedos, and a collection of silk ties worth more than a brand new car. His watch, a Patek Philippe Grand Complications, cost $320,000. He had bought it for himself on his 50th birthday because he believed he deserved it, and maybe he did. Vernon worked hard. He woke up at 5 every morning. He managed over 200 properties. He employed thousands of people. He was smart and sharp and relentless. But somewhere along the way, between the mansions and the watches and the tailored suits, Vernon had lost something important. He had lost the ability to see people for who they really were instead of what they wore. To Vernon, a man in a tuxedo was a man worth listening to. A man in a hoodie was a man worth laughing at. It was a simple rule, a clean rule, a rule that had never failed him. Until tonight, the Bay Area Children's Hope Benefit was Vernon's proudest achievement. He had created the gala 12 years ago in 2012 after reading a newspaper article about hungry children in Oakland public schools. The article said that nearly 60% of students in the Oakland Unified School District qualified for free or reduced price meals. Some children came to school with nothing in their stomachs. Some had not eaten since lunch the day before. Vernon had been eating a $200 brunch at a restaurant on Fillmore Street when he read that article. He looked down at his eggs Benedict and his fresh squeezed orange juice, and for a brief moment, he felt something he did not feel very often. Shame. So he started the gala, and it had done real good. Over 11 years, the Bay Area Children's Hope Benefit had raised over $14 million. That money had funded after-school programs, bought new books for libraries, supplied sports equipment, and most importantly, fed thousands of hungry kids. Vernon was proud of those numbers. He had every right to be. But pride is a funny thing. It starts as a small flame in your chest, warm and good and honest. But if you feed it too much, if you let it grow without watching it, that flame turns into something else. Something hot and dangerous. Something that burns the people around you. Vernon's pride had grown into something ugly. He did not host the gala just because he cared about hungry children. He hosted it because he loved being the man on the stage. He loved hearing his name announced. He loved the applause. He loved the way people looked at him when he walked into the room, like he was someone important, someone powerful, someone who mattered. And this year, Vernon wanted the gala to be bigger than ever. He wanted more attention, more press coverage, more donations, more applause. He needed a star. That is when someone on his planning committee, a young woman named Priya Chandrasekaran, who managed the guest list, suggested Steph Curry. He lives right here in the Bay Area, Priya said during a meeting at Vernon's office in the financial district. He's beloved. He does incredible charity work already with his Eat, Learn, Play foundation, and his name alone will bring in twice the donations. Vernon's eyes lit up like a man who had just found a $100 bill on the sidewalk. Get him, Vernon said. Whatever it takes. It took 4 months. 4 months of emails between Vernon's team and Steph's management. 4 months of scheduling conflicts and polite negotiations and back and forth conversations about the details. Steph Curry was not the kind of man who said yes to everything. He chose his events carefully. He wanted to know where the money was going. He wanted to see the numbers. He asked questions that most celebrity guests never bothered to ask. But eventually, Steph said yes, and Vernon made sure the whole world knew about it. He mentioned Steph's name in every interview he did leading up to the gala. He told us the San Francisco Chronicle. He told the local TV stations. He printed Steph's name in bold golden letters at the top of the program, right underneath the title of the event. He even had a special tables set up in the front row of the Grand Pavilion, Table 1, with a polished gold nameplate that read Stephen Curry in elegant script. Vernon imagined how the night would go. Steph would walk in wearing a stunning designer suit. The crowd would gasp. Cameras would flash. Vernon would shake Steph's hand on stage, and the photograph would appear in newspapers across the country. Two powerful men, two generous hearts. One unforgettable night. Everything was planned down to the last detail. The flowers, the music, the menu, the seating chart, the lighting. Vernon had spent $180,000 of his own money to make sure this gala was perfect. And for most of the evening, it was. The Grand Pavilion at the Fairmont Hotel looked like something out of a dream. The ceiling was draped in white silk that caught the light from three enormous crystal chandeliers. Each table was covered in a cream-colored cloth and decorated with centerpieces made of white roses, gold-painted eucalyptus leaves, and tall glass candle holders that flickered with soft amber light. A 12-piece jazz band played on a small stage in the corner, filling the room with smooth, warm music that made people sway in their seats. Guests arrived starting at 7 p.m. They came in limousines and town cars and sleek black SUVs. They walked through the hotel lobby in their tuxedos and gowns, trailing perfume and cologne, their jewelry catching the light like tiny stars. Vernon stood at the entrance and greeted every single one of them. A handshake for the men, a kiss on the cheek for the women, a compliment for everyone. Magnificent, sighed Charles. Is that a new Rolex, David? Beautiful. By 8 p.m., the room was full. 412 guests, each one of them worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. They ate filet mignon and roasted sea bass and tiny desserts made of chocolate and gold leaf. They drank champagne that cost $400 a bottle. They laughed and talked and clinked their glasses together. Everything was perfect. Except for one thing, the gold nameplate at table 1 sat untouched. The chair was empty, the champagne glass was full and still. No one had sat down, no one had arrived. Steph Curry was not there. Vernon checked his watch, 8:15 p.m. The main program was supposed to start in 15 minutes. He walked over to Priya, who was standing near the kitchen door with a clipboard and a worried expression on her face. Where is he? Vernon whispered, but the whisper had an edge to it. Sharp. Like a blade wrapped in silk. Priya shook her head. His team said he'll be here. He's running late. Something came up. Something came up. Vernon's left eye twitched. It always did that when he was angry. I've spent 4 months planning this. I've told every reporter in this city that Steph Curry is going to be here. I have 400 people in that room who came to see him. I know, Priya said quietly, but he'll be here. They promised. Vernon straightened his bow tie. He took a deep breath. He forced a smile onto his face. He said, we start without him. And so Vernon took the stage. He grabbed the microphone. He told jokes. He thanked the sponsors. He introduced the board members. He did what he always did. He commanded the room. He made people laugh. He made people feel important. He made them forget for a little while that the guest of honor was missing. But Vernon did not forget. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted to that empty chair at table 1. Every few minutes, his jaw tightened just a little bit more. Every few minutes, the flame of his pride burned a little hotter. By 8:40 p.m., Vernon was angry. Not the loud, explosive kind of angry. The quiet, dangerous kind. The kind that hides behind a smile and waits for the right moment to strike. And then, at exactly 8:47 p.m., the tall glass doors at the back of the Grand Pavilion swung open. Every head in the room turned, and there he was, Steph Curry, 6 feet 2 inches tall, lean and athletic, his face known to every single person in that room. But he was not wearing a designer suit. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He was not wearing polished shoes or a silk tie or diamond cufflinks. He was wearing a gray hoodie, dark jogger pants, white Under Armour Curry brand sneakers. His hair was slightly messy, pushed to one side, like he had been running his fingers through it. His eyes were red at the edges, heavy and tired, with dark circles underneath them that even the dim golden lighting of the ballroom could not hide. He carried no briefcase, no gift bag, no entourage. He was alone, just Steph. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking out at the sea of tuxedos and gowns and jewels. He looked like a man who had walked into the wrong room, like a man who had wandered into a palace when he meant to walk into a park. But he had not walked into the wrong room. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He just was not dressed the way Vernon Ashcroft expected. And that right there was the spark that lit the fire. Vernon saw the hoodie first, then the sneakers, then the joggers. He looked at Steph the way a teacher looks at a student who shows up to class without their homework, the way a judge looks at a man who walks into a courtroom wearing flip flops. Disappointment, disgust, and something worse, opportunity. Because Vernon Ashcroft had the microphone, he had the spotlight, he had 400 people waiting for him to say something funny. And Vernon never ever wasted an opportunity. He leaned forward, he curved his lips into that cold, sharp smile of his, the one that had no warmth in it. The one that was not really a smile at all, but a weapon dressed up as a greeting. And he opened his mouth. Well, well, well. Vernon's voice rolled through the grand pavilion like thunder across a valley. It bounced off the silk-draped ceiling, rattled against the crystal chandeliers, and landed on every single ear in the room. 412 pairs of eyes turned from the doorway back to the stage, back to Vernon, back to the man with the microphone and the cold, sharp smile. Ladies and gentlemen, Vernon said, stretching the words out slowly, savoring them the way a cat savors the moment. Before it pounces, it appears our guest of honor has finally arrived. He paused. He let the silence build. He was good at that. Vernon understood timing the way a musician understands rhythm. He knew exactly when to speak and exactly when to wait. And right now, the waiting was the weapon. Although Vernon continued, tilting his head to one side and looking Steph up and down with a long, slow gaze, I think he may have gotten his invitations mixed up because it looks like he dressed for a barbecue in someone's backyard, not a black tie gala at the Fairmont Hotel. Laughter. It came from different parts of the room. Some of it was loud and careless, from the kind of people who laughed at anything a powerful man said because they wanted to stay on his good side. Some of it was quiet and nervous, the awkward half-law of people who knew something was wrong but did not want to be the one to say it. Steph stood near the back of the room. He had taken 3 steps inside the door and then stopped. His hands were in the front pocket of his hoodie. His sneakers were bright white against the dark marble floor. He looked up at Vernon on the stage, and his face did not change. No anger, no embarrassment, no reaction at all. He just looked at Vernon the way the ocean looks at the shore, steady, patient, unmoved. But Vernon was not the kind of man who could read silence. He only understood noise. He only understood laughter and applause and the sound of his own voice filling a room. And so he took Steph's silence as permission to keep going. Steph, buddy, Vernon said, pressing one hand against his chest in a gesture of fake concern. I know the Warriors have been having a tough season, but I didn't realize things were so bad that you couldn't afford a suit. More laughter, but less than before. It was already starting to thin, like clouds breaking apart after a storm. Some people were not laughing at all. Some were looking down at their plates. Some were looking at each other with tight, uncomfortable expressions. At table 7, in the middle of the room, a woman named Marcelina Voss set her fork down very carefully. Marcelina was a pediatric surgeon at Stanford Children's Hospital. She had spent her entire career cutting open the chests of small children and fixing their broken hearts with steady hands and infinite patience. She had seen suffering that most people in this room could not even imagine. She knew what cruelty looked like, even when it wore a tuxedo and a smile. This is wrong, she whispered to her husband, a soft-spoken structural engineer named Idris, who sat beside her with his jaw clenched and his dark eyes fixed on the stage. He shouldn't be doing this. Idris placed his hand over hers. He doesn't know what he's doing, he whispered back. He has no idea. But Vernon kept going. He was on a roll now. The spot was hot on his face. The microphone was warm in his hand. The laughter, even though it was shrinking, was still there, still feeding that ugly flame of pride in his chest. I have to say, folks, this is a first, Vernon announced, sweeping his arm out towards Steph like a ringmaster introducing an act at the circus. In 12 years of hosting this gala, we have never had a guest arrive in athletic wear. I mean, I love Under Armour as much as the next guy, but I usually save it for the gym. He tugged at the lapel of his own Brioni tuxedo and grinned. Then again, maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. Maybe I believe that when you're invited to an event that raises money for children who don't have enough to eat, you show a little respect. You put on a jacket. You tie a tie. You show the room that you care enough to try. That word try landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples moved through the room, faces changed, smiles faded. Something shifted in the air, something invisible but real, like the temperature dropping before a storm. Because that word suggested something ugly. It suggested that Steph Curry, a man who had given millions of dollars to children's causes throughout his career, a man who had started the Eat, Learn, Play Foundation with his wife Ayesha in 2019 to fight hunger and illiteracy in Oakland, a man who had quietly visited hospitals and schools and shelters for years without ever calling a single reporter, it suggested that this man had not tried. It suggested that a hoodie meant he did not care. And that was not just wrong, that was cruel. At table 3, a retired schoolteacher named Ogechi Amaichi, who had spent 31 years teaching 4th grade in East Oakland, leaned back in her chair and shook her head slowly. She had been invited to the gala as an honoree, one of 10 educators being recognized for their service. She wore a simple blue dress she had bought on sale at Macy's. Her shoes were not Italian. Her earrings were not diamonds. They were small silver hoops her mother had given her before she passed. Ogechi looked at Steph, standing alone at the back of the room in his hoodie, and she saw something that Vernon Ashcroft was too blind to see. She saw a man who was tired, not lazy tired, not bored tired, not I couldn't be bothered tired, soul tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy inside your heart, the kind that settles into your bones and makes your eyes look older than your face, the kind that no amount of sleep can fix because it is not your body that is exhausted, it is your spirit. Oh, she had seen that kind of tired before. She had seen it in the eyes of mothers who worked 3 jobs and still could not pay rent. She had seen it in the eyes of fathers who stood in line at food banks with their children, smiling even though their hearts were breaking. She had seen it in the eyes of her own students, 9 and 10 years old, who came to school with empty stomachs and pretended they were not hungry because they did not want to be different. Steph Curry had that look, and whatever the reason for it, Ogechi knew, she knew deep in her bones, that it had nothing to do with disrespect. It had nothing to do with not caring. It had nothing to do with clothes, but Vernon did not see any of that. Vernon saw hoodie and sneakers. Vernon saw a broken rule. Vernon saw a punchline, and so he delivered one more. All kidding aside, Vernon said, and everyone in the room knew that when a person says all kidding aside, the kidding is never actually aside. Steph, we're thrilled to have you. Truly. And hey, look on the bright side. If we need someone to run out and grab pizza later, you're already dressed for it. He winked. He actually winked. The laughter that followed was thin and hollow, like the sound of wind blowing through an empty house. More people had stopped laughing now. A man at table 9 had pushed his chair back from the table and crossed his arms. A woman near the bar had turned her back to the stage entirely, pretending to study the label on a wine bottle. And Priya Chandrasekaran, standing near the kitchen door with her clipboard clutched against her chest, felt her stomach turn. She had worked for Vernon for 3 years. She had seen him be charming and generous and clever, but she had also seen this side of him, the side that came out when he felt embarrassed or threatened or out of control, the side that used humor like a knife. Priya wanted to say something. She wanted to step forward and grab the microphone out of Vernon's hand and tell the room that Steph Curry did not deserve this, that no one deserved this, but she didn't. She just stood there, the way most people stand there when cruelty happens, right in front of them, frozen, silent, hoping someone else will be brave enough to stop it. Steph, meanwhile, had begun walking. He moved through the room the way he moved on a basketball court, smooth and calm and purposeful. No wasted steps, no hesitation. His white sneakers were silent on the marble floor. His face was still and unreadable, like the surface of a lake on a windless morning. People watched him pass. Some reached out to touch his arm or shake his hand. A young man at table 11 whispered, "We love you, Steph." A woman at table 5 mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." Steph nodded at them. Small, gentle nods. The kind that said, "I see you, thank you, it's okay." He reached table 1, the front row, the gold nameplate, the empty chair that had been waiting for him all night. He pulled out the chair. The legs scraped softly against the floor. He sat down. He placed his hands on the white tablecloth, fingers laced together, and he looked up at the stage. He looked directly at Vernon Ashcroft, and he did not say a single word. The silence coming from Steph was louder than anything Vernon had said all night. It was the kind of silence that does not back down, the kind that does not fight but does not surrender either, the kind that simply exists, solid and unshakable, like a mountain that does not care about the wind. Vernon cleared his throat. For a tiny moment, no more than half a second, something flickered across his face. It was so quick that most people missed it. But Priya saw it, and Marcelina saw it, and Ogechi saw it from her table across the room. It was doubt. A small, cold crack in the armor of Vernon's confidence. A whisper in the back of his mind that said, maybe you went too far. But Vernon did what Vernon always did with doubt. He buried it. He pished it down deep, covered it with a smile, and moved on. "All right, folks," he said, clapping his hands together and flashing his perfect white teeth. Let's get to the fun part of the evening. It's time for our live action. The crowd shifted. Glasses were refilled. Conversations hummed back to life. The jazz band played a soft melody. The room exhaled. But something had changed. Something in the air had cracked, like a thin line running through a pane of glass. You could not see it. You could not touch it. But it was there. And everyone in the room knew somewhere in the quiet part of their hearts that before the night was over, that glass was going to shatter. They just did not know how. And standing at the back of the room, near the kitchen door, Priya Chandrasekaran looked at her phone. She had just received a text message from someone on Steph's management team, a woman named Danielle who had been coordinating the visit for months. The message was short, just two sentences. He came straight from the hospital. Please don't ask him about it yet. Priya read the message twice, then three times. Her hands started to shake. She looked up at Steph, sitting quietly at table one with his hands folded and his tired eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The hospital! What hospital? Why? What happened? Priya did not know the answers yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty as she slipped her phone back into her pocket and pressed her trembling fingers against her lips. Vernon had made a terrible mistake, and before this night was over, every single person in this room was going to know it. The auction began at 9 p.m. sharp. Vernon was back in his element now. This was what he did best. This was his stage, his show, his kingdom. The microphone was in his hand, and the room was watching, and for a little while, the awkward moment with Steph Curry faded into the background like a stain someone had thrown a tablecloth over. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Vernon announced, his voice bright and booming. You've eaten your dinner. You've had your champagne. You've complimented each other's outfits. He paused and glanced sideways at Steph. Well, most of you have. A scattering of uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. But Vernon was already moving on, sweeping his arm toward a large easel on the right side of the stage, where a beautiful photograph of a Tuscan villa sat inside a gilded frame. Our first item tonight is 1 week, 7 glorious nights, at the Villa Montalcino in Tuscany, Italy. Private chef included. Wine cellar access. A view of the rolling hills that will make you forget you ever lived in a city. Starting bid, $10,000. A paddle went up at table 4. 10,000. 12, called a voice from the back. 15, said a man at table 8, a venture capitalist named Roman Felstead who owned 3 homes already but always wanted more. The numbers climbed. 20,000, 25. The villa sold for $38,000 to a woman named Genevieve Hatfield, who clapped her hands together like a child opening a birthday present and kissed her husband on the cheek. Vernon grinned. Excellent. Genevieve, you're going to love Tuscany. Just remember to pack a suitcase this time. Last year you forgot your shoes at the resort in Bali. The room laughed. This was the Vernon they liked, the charming one, the funny one, the one who made you feel like you were part of an inside joke at the most exclusive party in the world. The auction continued. Item after item. A private dinner prepared by a Michelin-starred chef from Atelier Cren in San Francisco, courtside seats for a Warriors game at Chase Center. A weekend sailing trip around the San Juan Islands. A signed guitar from a Grammy-winning musician. Vernon worked the room like a conductor leading an orchestra. He pointed and shouted and teased and charmed. He called people by their first names. He remembered their children's names. He knew exactly when to push and when to pull back, when to raise the energy and when to let it settle. Come on, Mr. Hayashi. Vernon called to a hedge fund manager at table 6. Your fund returned 42% last quarter. I know because I read about it in the Wall Street Journal. You can do better than 20,000. Kenji Hayashi laughed and raised his paddle. 25. That's what I like to hear. By 9:30 p.m., the auction had moved through 11 items. The running total glowed on the large screen behind Vernon in bright white numbers. $387,000. It was a good number. A very good number. One of the best in the Gala's 12-year history. Vernon loosened his bow tie slightly and allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. This was going to be a record-breaking night. He could feel it, but there was something nagging at him. A small, irritating thought that buzzed around the back of his mind like a fly he could not swat. Steph Curry had not bid on a single item. Not one. 11 items had come and gone. Luxury vacations. Exclusive experiences. Once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. And through all of it, Steph had sat at table 1 with his hands folded, and his expression calm and his bidding paddle untouched on the white tablecloth beside his water glass. He had not even picked it up. Vernon noticed. He had been watching Steph all night, the way a dog watches a squirrel, unable to look away even when there are more important things to pay attention to. Every time a new item was announced, Vernon's eyes would flick to table 1. Every time the paddles stayed flat on the table, it bothered Vernon. It bothered him more than it should have. Because in Vernon's mind, the auction was not just about raising this money. It was about participation. It was about showing that you belonged. It was about proving that you were serious, that you were generous, that you were one of them. And Steph, sitting there in his hoodie with his paddle untouched, was not playing the game. Vernon tried to ignore it. He really did. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself to focus on the guests who were bidding, the ones who were generous, the ones who were making this night a success. But Vernon's pride was like a dog with a bone. It would not let go. So between items, while the stage crew set up the photograph for the next auction piece, Vernon leaned into the microphone one more time. I notice our friend in the front row is being awfully quiet tonight, he said, his tone light and playful, but with that familiar sharp edge hiding underneath like a thorn inside a flower. 12 items in and not a single bid. I guess maybe he spent his budget on that hoodie. He chuckled at his own joke. He was the only one. The room did not laugh this time. Not even the nervous laughers. Not even the people who always laughed because they wanted to stay on Vernon's good side. The silence that followed Vernon's words was flat and cold, like a door being shut. Something had shifted. You could feel it in the room the way you can feel the tide changing even if you are not looking at the water. The guests had grown tired of the jokes. The cruelty that had seemed almost forgivable the first time, almost excusable as playful teasing, had become something else with repetition. It had become bullying, and everyone in the room knew it. At table 7, Marcelina Voss pressed her napkin against her mouth and shook her head. Her husband Idris had stopped watching the stage entirely. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through old text messages, doing anything to avoid being part of what was happening. At table 10, Ogechi Amechi, the retired schoolteacher from East Oakland, closed her eyes. In 31 years of teaching, she had broken up more fights and dried more tears and stopped more bullying than she could count. She knew what it looked like when a person with power picked on a person who would not fight back. She had seen it on playgrounds and in hallways and cafeterias, children being cruel to other children because cruelty made them feel tall. This was no different. The playground was just fancier. And at the back of the room, Priya Chandrasekaran felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She pulled it out. Another message from Danielle, Steph's team coordinator. Is he okay? How is he holding up? Priya looked at Steph. He was sitting exactly the way he had been sitting all night. Hands folded, eyes forward, face still. But Priya noticed something she had not seen before. Something small. Something that most people would miss. Steph's right thumb was rubbing against the inside of his left wrist, back and forth, slowly, rhythmically, the way a person rubs a worry stone. The way a child rubs a blanket for comfort. He was not unbothered. He was not indifferent. He was not sitting there feeling nothing while Vernon mocked him in front of hundreds of people. He was holding himself together. And whatever was weighing on him, whatever had happened at the hospital, whatever had put those dark circles under his eyes and that crack in his steady voice, it was taking every ounce of strength he had to sit in that chair and stay calm and not let the room see what he was carrying inside. Priya typed a reply to Danielle. He's hanging in there, but you need to tell me what happened. I need to know. A minute passed. Then 2, then 3. Priya stared at her phone, waiting. The little dots appeared, showing that Danielle was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again. Finally, the message came through. It was longer this time, much longer. Priya read it standing in the shadows near the kitchen door, her back pressed against the wall, her clipboard forgotten on the counter behind her. She read it once. Her hand went to her mouth. She read it again. Her eyes filled with tears. She read it a third time, because her brain could not accept what her eyes were seeing. Because the words on the screen painted a picture so heartbreaking, so raw, so impossibly unfair, that it made everything happening on that stage, every joke, every smirk, every cruel comment about hoodies and sneakers and dress codes, feel like the smallest, ugliest, most shameful thing in the world. Priya locked her phone. She slid it back into her pocket. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a long, shaking breath. She knew something now, something the room did not know, something Vernon Ashcroft certainly did not know. And when it came out, when the truth about Steph Curry's evening finally rose to the surface like a body of water that could no longer hold what had been pushed beneath it, this room was going to break. Not the chandeliers, not the glasses, not the tables or the chairs or the marble floor, the people. The people in this room were going to break. But the auction was not over yet. And Vernon was already introducing the final item, the most important item of the night. The one that would bring all of this, every joke, every silence, every hidden tear, crashing together like two waves meeting in the middle of a dark and churning sea. Vernon cleared his throat. He straightened his bow tie. He smiled that perfect practice smile. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, our final item of the evening. And at table 1, for the first time all night, Steph Curry unfolded his hands. Our final item tonight, Vernon said, his voice dropping to that low, serious tone he reserved for moments he wanted people to remember, is not a vacation. It is not a dinner. It is not a signed piece of memorabilia you hang on your wall and forget about. He paused. The jazz band had stopped playing. The waiters had stopped moving. Even the ice in the water glasses seemed to stop clinking. This is the reason we are here tonight. Vernon pressed a button on the small remote in his left hand. The screen behind him changed. The auction total disappeared, replaced by a photograph that filled the entire display from edge to edge. It was a photograph of children, not children at a birthday party, not children on a playground laughing and chasing each other. These were children sitting in a school cafeteria. A cafeteria with cracked linoleum floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered. The tables were old and scratched. The walls were bare. But it was the children's faces that made the room go still. They were smiling, every single one of them. A boy in a too big t-shirt was grinning at the camera with a gap where his two front teeth should have been. A girl with braids and glasses was laughing, so hard her eyes were squeezed shut. Another boy, small and thin, was holding up a carton of milk like it was a trophy he had just won. They were smiling because they were eating. For some of them, this was the only real meal they would have today. This, Vernon said, and for once there was no cleverness in his voice, no sharp edge, no performance, is the Oakland Unified School District Meal Program. It serves breakfast and lunch to over 36,000 students across the district. Many of these kids come from families living below the poverty line. Many of them go home to empty kitchens and empty refrigerators. Many of them go to bed hungry and wake up hungry and walk to school hungry, and the only thing standing between them and an empty stomach is this program. He let the photographs sit on the screen. He let the faces of those children do what no amount of words could do. He let them speak. Every dollar you pledge right now, Vernon continued, goes directly to this program. No overhead. No administrative fees. Every single cent goes to feeding a child who would otherwise go without. The room was heavy with something that had not been there before. Not guilt exactly. Something deeper than guilt. Something that crawled into the space between what these guests had and what those children did not have, and forced them to sit inside that gap and feel it. At table 7, Marcelina Voss wiped her eyes. She saw children like these every day at the hospital. Children who were too small for their age because they had not eaten enough. Children whose bones were fragile because their diets lacked calcium and protein. Children who fell asleep during checkups because hunger had stolen their energy the way a thief steals in the night, quietly, completely, without leaving a trace. At table 10, Ogechi Amaichi did not wipe her eyes. She let the tears fall. She had taught in those cafeterias. She had sat with those children. She had opened her own purse on more days than she could count to buy a student a sandwich or a bag of chips or a juice box because the school had run out of meals before the last lunch period. She knew those faces, not the specific ones on the screen, but she knew those faces. The floor is open, Vernon said. Who wants to start? For a moment, nobody moved. The photograph had done something to the room. It had peeled back the luxury and the champagne and the tuxedos and exposed something raw underneath, something so uncomfortable, something that made it hard to raise a paddle and shout a number because no number felt like enough. Then a hand went up at table 8. 5,000, said Roman Felsted, the venture capitalist. The spell broke. Paddles began to rise. 10,000, called Genevieve Hatfield, the woman who had won the Tuscan villa earlier. 15, said a deep voice from table 3. 20,000, said Kenji Hayashi at table 6, the hedge fund manager who had returned 42% last quarter. Vernon found his rhythm again. He pointed and nodded and pushed the way he always did. 25. Do I hear 25? Come on, people. We're talking about feeding children. 30,000, someone shouted from the back. 35. 40. The numbers climbed like a bird rising on a warm current. 45,000, 50, 55. The screen updated with each new pledge, the white numbers growing larger and larger. But then, somewhere around 60,000, the climbing slowed. Paddles lowered, hands returned to laps. The energy that had been building like a wave began to flatten out and spread thin across the room. 62,000, said a woman at table 12. Her voice was strong but final. The voice of someone who had given their last number. Vernon scanned the room. 62,000, can we do better? 65? Anyone? We're feeding 36,000 kids here. That's less than $2 per child. Surely we can push a little higher. He looked from table to table. He made eye contact with the biggest donors in the room. He smiled. He nodded. He used every trick he had learned in 12 years of running this auction. Nobody moved. The paddles stayed down. The champagne glasses went up. People took long sips and looked at the tablecloths and pretended to study the centerpieces. $62,000. A fine number. A generous number. A number that would have been celebrated in any other year. But tonight, with that photograph still burning on the screen behind him, 62,000 felt like a whisper when the moment called for a shout. Vernon sighed. Not a disappointed sigh, exactly. More like the sigh of a man who had done his best and knew when to stop pushing. All right, he said. $62,000 going once. He raised his hand, ready to bring it down in the traditional gesture of a closing bid. Going twice. His hand hung in the air. And then, a movement at table 1. It was small at first, so small that only the people at the nearest tables noticed. Steph Curry shifted in his chair. He unfolded his hands, the hands that had been folded together all evening like a man in prayer, and he placed his palms flat on the white tablecloth. Then he pushed himself up, slowly, deliberately, the way a man stands when he has made a decision that cannot be unmade. The way a man stands when the weight he has been carrying all night is about to come off his shoulders, one way or another. He rose to his full height, 6 feet 2 inches of quiet, exhausted, hoodie wearing, sneaker clad determination, and he raised his hand. Not a paddle, just his hand. Open, steady, calm. The same hand that had drained more three pointers than any human being in the history of basketball. The same hand that had held championship trophies and MVP awards and the tiny fingers of his own children. The same hand that, just a few hours ago, had held something else entirely. Something that this room did not know about yet. Something that would change everything. Vernon blinked. His raised hand froze in midair. The closing gesture died before it was born. Mr. Curry, Vernon said. And there was a flicker of something in his voice now. Something uncertain, something off balance, like a man who has been walking on solid ground and suddenly feels it shift beneath his feet. You'd like to bid? Steph did not answer the question. Instead, he said 5 words. 5 simple, quiet, ordinary words that carried no anger and no pride and no showmanship. 5 words spoken in a voice so calm and so steady that they cut through the golden air of the grand pavilion like a blade through silk. I'd like the microphone, please. The room inhaled. 412 people drew breath at the same moment, and the collective sound of it was like a wind passing through a forest. Chairs creaked. Jewelry clinked. Someone's water glass trembled against a plate with a tiny musical ring. Vernon stared at Steph. His fingers were still wrapped around the microphone. This microphone was his. It had always been his. For 12 years, no one else had held it during the auction. No one else had stood at this podium. No one else had commanded this stage. But Steph was standing in the front row with his hand out. Not demanding, not aggressive. Just open, patient, waiting. And 412 people were watching. Vernon could have said no. He could have made another joke. He could have laughed it off and moved on and closed the auction at $62,000 and thanked everyone for coming and called it a night. But something in Steph's eyes stopped him. Vernon had been looking at Steph all night. He had looked at the hoodie and the sneakers and the messy hair and the empty paddle, but he had never looked at Steph's eyes. Not really. Not the way you look at someone when you actually want to see them. He looked now, and what he saw made his stomach drop. Steph's eyes were not the eyes of a man who was angry about being mocked. They were not the eyes of a man who wanted revenge or attention or the chance to show someone up. They were the eyes of a man who had been crying. Not now, earlier. The redness was there, faint but undeniable, the slight puffiness around the edges. The thin, glassy shine that comes after tears have dried, but the sadness remains, pooled just behind the surface, waiting. Vernon had seen those eyes before. He had seen them in the mirror on the morning his mother died. He had seen them on his daughter's face after her first heartbreak. He had seen them on the faces of people who were holding themselves together with nothing but willpower and the desperate hope that if they just kept breathing, they would make it through. Something cold moved through Vernon's chest. Not guilt yet, not shame. Something before those things, something quieter. A question. What happened to this man tonight? Vernon loosened his grip on the microphone. He felt the smooth metal slide against his palm. He looked at Steph's outstretched hand. He looked at those tired, reddened eyes. And for the first time all evening, Vernon Ashcroft did the right thing. He handed over the microphone. Steph held the microphone the way he held everything, gently, like it mattered, like it was borrowed and he intended to return it in better condition than he found it. He stood at the front of the room, not on the stage, not behind the podium, just there, in the space between table one and the first step of the platform. A man in a gray hoodie standing on a marble floor surrounded by 400 people in the finest clothes money could buy. He did not rush to speak. He took a breath, a long, slow one. The kind of breath you take when you are gathering yourself. When you are reaching down into the deepest part of who you are and pulling something up that you know is going to hurt when it reaches the air. I want to thank everyone here tonight, Steph said. His voice was soft, not weak. Soft the way rain is soft, the way a mother's hand on a child's forehead is soft. It filled the room without pushing. It reached the back tables without straining. You've given a lot. $62,000 for a meal program that feeds kids who would otherwise go hungry. That matters. Every dollar of it matters. And I don't want anyone in this room to think for a second that what you've given tonight is not enough. Because to a kid sitting in a cafeteria with an empty stomach, every single dollar is a miracle. He paused. His eyes moved across the room, not performing, not searching for approval, just looking, seeing people. I know some of you are wondering why I showed up looking like this. He glanced down at his hoodie. A small smile crossed his face, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that holds sadness inside it the way a jar holds water, barely and with cracks. I'll explain. But first, I want to do something. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie, the same pocket where his hands had been resting all evening. He pulled out a piece of paper. It was folded twice, neatly but not perfectly, the way something gets folded when you do it quickly in a car or a hallway or a hospital corridor. He unfolded it, he held it up, not dramatically. Not like a man trying to impress, like a man handing a cashier a receipt, simply, plainly. I'd like to add to tonight's total. The camera operator at the side of the room zoomed in. The image appeared on the giant screen behind Steph, a check, handwritten, made out to the Bay Area Children's Hope Benefit, care of the Oakland Unified School District Meal Program. And at the bottom, in neat blue ink, a number. Thousand. $1 million. The gasp that went through the Grand Pavilion was not a sound that 400 individual people made. It was a sound the room made. The room itself entailed. The chandeliers seemed to shudder. The candle flames on every table leaned sideways as if blown by a wind that had no source. A woman at table 12 pressed both hands against her chest and made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. At table 9, a man gripped the arms of his chair so hard the wood creaked. At table 4, a couple looked at each other with wide, disbelieving eyes, their mouths forming the same word at the same time without making a sound. Million. At table 7, Marcelina Voss covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders shook. Her husband Idris put his arm around her and pulled her close, his own eyes glistening. At table 10, Ogechi Amaechi did not gasp. She did not cover her mouth or grab the arm of the person beside her. She simply nodded, a slow, deep nod. The nod of a woman who had waited 31 years to see a moment like this, a moment where someone with everything gave something real to the people who had nothing. And at the back of the room, Priya Chandrasekaran lowered her head and let the tears fall onto her clipboard. She did not wipe them away. She let the ink on her carefully printed schedule blur and run. None of it mattered anymore. The schedule, the program, the carefully planned timeline of the evening. None of it mattered compared to what was happening right now. Vernon Ashcroft stood behind the podium. His hands were gripping the wooden edges so tightly that his knuckles had turned the color of bone. His face, which had been so animated all evening, so full of expressions and smiles and winks and clever little movements, had gone completely still. He stared at the screen, at the number, at the 6 zeros lined up in a row like soldiers. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Nothing came out. The man who had talked all night. The man who always had a joke, a comment, a clever response for every situation. The man who had mocked Steph Curry's hoodie and sneakers and empty paddle and casual clothes. That man had nothing to say, because there is no joke you can make about $1 million given to feed hungry children. There is no clever comment. There is no sarcastic remark. There is nothing you can say that does not make you sound exactly as small as you are. And Vernon Ashcroft, for the first time in his 56 years, felt very, very small. But Steph was not done. He lowered the check. He folded it once and set it gently on the edge of table 1 beside the gold nameplate with his name on it. Then he raised the microphone again. "But I need to tell you something," he said. "I need to tell you why I'm dressed like this tonight. I need to tell you about someone I met today." The room leaned forward. Not physically, or maybe physically too, it was hard to tell, but in some deeper way, the way a flower leans toward light, the way a river leans toward the sea. Something in the room was being pulled toward Steph Curry, drawn by a gravity that had nothing to do with fame or money or basketball. It had to do with truth. The room could feel it coming. The way you can feel thunder before you hear it. The way you can feel bad news before someone says the words. "His name," Steph said, and his voice cracked, just slightly. Just enough for everyone to hear it. Just enough to make 400 people hold their breath at the exact same moment, "is Tobias." He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He blinked rapidly, 3 times, 4 times, fighting something that was rising inside him like water behind a dam. His jaw tightened. His hand, the one not holding the microphone, curled into a fist at his side. Then he uncurled it. He breathed, he continued. "Tobias Keene, he's 9 years old. And right now, while we're sitting in this beautiful room, eating beautiful food and wearing beautiful clothes, he is lying in a bed at Uksef Benioff Children's Hospital in Oakland, room 314, 3rd floor, in a bed that is too big for his body, under a Golden State Warriors blanket that his mother bought him for his 8th birthday." Steph's eyes were wet now. He did not try to hide it. He did not wipe his face or look away or pretend that the tears were not there. He let them come the way Ogechi had let hers come earlier. Openly, honestly, without shame. "Tobias has osteosarcoma, bone cancer. He was diagnosed 5 months ago. He has been in that hospital for 7 weeks. Tomorrow morning at 6:50 a.m., he is going into surgery. A big surgery. The kind where the doctors sit you down and say the words that no parent should ever have to hear."
He paused.
The silence was so complete that you could hear the wax dripping inside the candles on the tables. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. You could hear, if you listened closely enough, the sound of hearts breaking all across the room. "I went to see him today," Steph said. "I go to that hospital when I can. Not with cameras. Not for publicity. I go because those kids need someone to show up. And I believe that showing up is the most important thing a person can do." He looked down at his hoodie. He pinched the fabric between his thumb and forefinger and held it out slightly, the way you might show someone a stain on your shirt. I was with Tobias for 3 hours.
3 hours.
We talked about basketball. We talked about his dog, a golden retriever named Splash. A tiny broken laugh escaped Steph's lips. He named his dog after me, after the Splash Brothers. He told me he taught the dog to high five because that's what I do after a three-pointer. A sound moved through the room, not laughter, not a gasp. Something between a moan and a sigh. The sound 100 people make when their hearts are being squeezed at the same time. We talked about his favorite video games. We talked about school. He told me he's in fourth grade and his best subject is math and his worst subject is spelling, but he's working on it. Steph smiled, and the smile was so full of love and pain that it was hard to look at directly, the way it is hard to look at the sun. We talked about what he wants to be when he grows up. He says he wants to be a basketball player, and then he said, but not just any basketball player. I want to shoot like you, mister. Curry. Steph stopped. He pressed his fist against his mouth. His shoulders rose and fell with a breath that shuddered on its way in and shuddered on its way out. At table 7, Marcelina Voss was sobbing. Not quietly, openly. The kind of crying that does not care who is watching. She had operated on children with osteosarcoma. She knew what that surgery looked like. She knew what the odds were. She knew what Tobias was facing in the morning, and the knowledge sat in her chest like a stone. At table 10, Ogechi Amaichi had her eyes closed and her hands clasped together in her lap. Her lips were moving silently. She was praying. At table 3, Franklin Cho, the tech billionaire who had spent the evening admiring his own diamond cufflinks, was staring at his hands like he had never seen them before. Like they were strangers attached to his wrists, like they had never done a single thing that mattered. Steph continued. And then Tobias said something to me that I will carry for the rest of my life. The room was not breathing. The room had stopped being a room. It had become something else. A church. A hospital waiting area. A place where pretending was no longer possible. He looked at me with those big brown eyes, this little boy. This brave little 9-year-old boy who hasn't complained once in 7 weeks, who makes his nurses laugh every morning, who draws pictures with crayons and tapes them to his wall because he wants his room to look happy even when he doesn't feel happy. Steph's voice broke. It cracked right down the middle like a plate dropped on a kitchen floor. He looked at me and he said, Mr. Curry, I'm scared about tomorrow. What if I don't wake up? The sound that went through the grand pavilion was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever heard. It was a collective sound, a unified sound. 400 people making the same noise at the same time. A gasp that turned into a moan that turned into a silence so profound it felt holy. A waiter standing near the bar set down his tray. He turned away from the room and pressed his forehead against the wall. His shoulders shook. A woman at table 11 buried her face in her husband's shoulder. Her fingers gripped the fabric of his jacket so tightly that her knuckles went white. A man at table 2, a retired judge named Cornelius Whitmore, who had spent 40 years on the bench and never cried in a courtroom, felt a tear slide down his weathered cheek and did not raise a hand to stop it. And Vernon Ashcroft. Vernon stood behind that podium and felt something he had not felt since the morning his mother died 23 years ago. A feeling so overwhelming, so total, so inescapable that it bypassed every wall he had built and every mask he had worn and went straight to the center of who he was. His chin trembled. His eyes filled. His chest heaved once, twice, and then the dam broke. Vernon Ashcroft cried, not politely, not the single dignified tear of a man at a funeral. He cried the way children cry. The ugly way, the gasping way. The way that twists your face into shapes you cannot control and makes sounds you did not know you could make. Because Vernon understood now. In a single, blinding, devastating moment of clarity, he understood everything. He understood why Steph was wearing a hoodie. He understood why Steph was late. He understood why Steph's eyes were red and his voice was tired and his hands had been folded together all night, like a man holding himself in one piece. Steph had been sitting with a dying child. Steph had been holding the hand of a 9-year-old boy who was afraid he might not wake up from surgery in the morning. Steph had driven straight from that hospital room to this ballroom, still wearing the clothes he had put on that morning, because changing into a tuxedo would have meant leaving Tobias 1 minute sooner. And to Steph Curry, 1 minute with that boy was worth more than every tuxedo in every closet in every mansion in Pacific Heights. Vernon had mocked this man. He had stood on the stage with his $10,000 suit and his $320,000 watch and his perfectly styled hair and his perfectly rehearsed smile, and he had made fun of a man who smelled like hospital soap because he had been hugging a child with cancer. The weight of that truth pressed down on Vernon like the ocean. It filled his lungs. It crushed his chest. It pushed him to his knees. Not literally, not yet, but in every way that mattered. Vernon Ashcroft was on the ground. Steph was still talking. His voice was raw now, stripped of everything except honesty.
I held Tobias.
Steph said.
I pulled him into a hug.
Gently, because his body is fragile right now. And I told him, you're going to wake up, buddy. And when you do, I'll be there. I promise. Steph wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie, the same hoodie Vernon had mocked, the same hoodie that had been pressed against the thin, trembling back of a 9-year-old boy fighting for his life. When I left that hospital, it was 8:15. This gala had already started. My tuxedo was at home. I didn't have time to change. He shook his head slowly. I didn't want to change. I didn't care about changing. Because the only thing I could think about on the drive over here was Tobias's face and his question, and whether I had said the right thing, and whether saying the right thing even matters when a 9-year-old boy is asking you if he is going to die. Steph lowered the microphone for a moment. He stood there in the silence, breathing. Then he raised it one last time. I didn't come here tonight to impress anyone with my clothes. I came because those kids on that screen behind me deserve to eat. I came because Tobias would have wanted me to come. Because even lying in that hospital bed, even with everything he's facing, the last thing he said to me before I left was, "Go help the other kids, Mr. Curry. I'll be okay." Steph looked at Vernon. Not with anger, not with judgment, not with the satisfaction of a man who has won an argument. He looked at Vernon the way Tobias had looked at him, with honesty, with openness, with the kind of vulnerability that is not weakness, but the strongest thing a person can be. I didn't change my clothes tonight, Steph said, because I didn't want to waste a single minute. Every minute I spent picking out a tie or polishing my shoes was a minute I could have spent with that kid. He took one step toward Vernon, and I will always choose the kid. Those 6 words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. I will always choose the kid. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Nobody reached for a glass or shifted in a chair or cleared a throat or whispered to the person beside them. The grand pavilion of the Fairmont Hotel, a room designed to hold music and laughter and the bright clinking sounds of celebration, held nothing now except silence. But it was not empty silence. It was the fullest silence any person in that room had ever experienced. It was silence with weight, silence with texture, silence that pressed against your chest and made your eyes sting and your throat tighten. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of people realizes, all at the same moment, that they have been looking at the wrong things their entire lives. Looking at watches instead of faces. Looking at suits instead of souls. Looking at what people wore instead of what people carried. Steph stood in that silence. He did not fill it. He did not try to break it or soften it or move past it. He let it exist. He let it do its work, the way a doctor lets medicine do its work, the way a farmer lets rain do its work, quietly, patiently, without interference. The check for $1 million sat on the edge of table 1, next to the gold nameplate. A piece of paper worth more than most of the jewelry in the room combined, and it had come out of the pocket of a hoodie. At table 7, Marcelina Voss could not stop crying. She had tried. She had pressed her napkin against her eyes and taken deep breaths and told herself that she was a surgeon, that she was strong, that she had held beating hearts in her hands and had not flinched. But this was different. This was not an operating room where training took over and emotion stepped aside. This was a ballroom where a man in a hoodie had just told the truth, and the truth had cracked her open like an egg. Her husband Idris held her. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He just held her and let his own tears fall into her hair and thought about their daughter, Amira, who was 7 years old and sleeping safely in her bed at home, and about Tobias, who was 9 years old and lying in a hospital bed, wondering if he would see tomorrow. At table 10, Ogechi Amechi opened her eyes. She had been praying. Not the formal kind of prayer with folded hands and memorized words, the desperate kind. The kind that rises from the gut and goes straight up without stopping. She looked at Steph and she saw every child she had ever taught, every hungry face, every too-thin body, every pair of eyes that tried to pay attention during math class while a stomach growled beneath the desk. She had given 31 years of her life to those children. She had given her energy, her patience, her money, her weekends, her holidays, her back, her knees, her voice, and she had always wondered in the quiet moments if it mattered, if any of it mattered. If one person could really make a difference in a world that seemed designed to let children fall through the cracks. Looking at Steph Curry now, she had her answer. At table 3, Franklin Cho sat perfectly still. His diamond cufflinks caught the candlelight and threw tiny sparks across the tablecloth. He stared at them. These cufflinks cost $14,000. He had bought them at a boutique in Paris because the salesman told him they were one of a kind. He had worn them tonight because he wanted people to notice them. He wanted people to see that he was the kind of man who could spend $14,000 on 2 small pieces of metal that did nothing except hold his sleeves together. $14,000. Tobias Keene's mother probably did not have $14,000. She probably could not afford the parking at this hotel. She was probably sitting right now in a hospital room with cracked linoleum floors, sleeping in a chair beside her son's bed, wearing the same clothes she had worn yesterday because she had not gone home in a week. Franklin looked at his cufflinks one more time. Then he reached down, unfastened them both, and slipped them into his jacket pocket. He would never wear them again. At table 9, the retired judge Cornelius Whitmore sat with his hands flat on the table. He had spent 4 decades listening to people speak in courtrooms. He had heard opening statements and closing arguments from the finest lawyers in California. He had heard confessions that chilled his blood and testimonies that made him believe in the goodness of human beings, but he had never heard anything like what Steph Curry had just said. Because Steph had not argued, he had not persuaded, he had not performed, he had simply told the truth. And the truth delivered without decoration, without strategy, without the armor of cleverness or the shield of humor, had hit this room harder than any closing argument Cornelius had ever witnessed. Truth does that. When it arrives stripped of everything except itself, it becomes the most powerful force in any room. More powerful than money, more powerful than fame, more powerful than a tuxedo or a watch or a perfectly practiced smile. And then there was Vernon. Vernon Ashcroft stood behind the podium. His face was wet. His eyes were swollen. His bow tie, which he had straightened and adjusted 100 times throughout the evening, hung loose and crooked against his collar like a flag that had surrendered. His hands still gripped the podium, not for power now, for balance. Because Vernon's legs were shaking, his knees felt like they were made of water. His stomach had twisted itself into a knot so tight that he could feel it pressing against his ribs. He looked at Steph, and he saw for the first time what everyone else in the room had been seeing all night. Not a man in a hoodie, not a man who had disrespected the dress code, not a man who had failed to meet the standards of the Bay Area Children's Hope benefit. He saw a man who had spent 3 hours holding the hand of a dying child and then drove across the city to give $1 million to feed other children because a 9-year-old boy in a hospital bed told him to go help the other kids. He saw the biggest person he had ever met in his life, and Vernon had laughed at him. The shame that moved through Vernon's body was not like anything he had ever felt. It was not embarrassment. Embarrassment is a surface thing, a blush, a stammer, a moment you cringe about later and then forget. This was deeper. This reached into the marrow of who Vernon was and pulled out every ugly thing he had hidden there, every judgment, every assumption, every time he had looked at another person and measured them by what they wore instead of who they were, every time he had chosen the appearance over the truth. It all came flooding up at once, like water breaking through a crack in a dam, and Vernon could not hold it. He could not manage it. He could not smooth it over with a joke, or redirect it with a clever line, or bury it under a smile. He stepped forward. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. He moved from behind the podium and stood in the open space of the stage, exposed, unprotected, without his microphone, without his armor. Steph! His voice came out broken. Not the polished, projected voice that had commanded this room for 12 years. A small voice, a cracked voice. The voice of a man standing in the rubble of everything he thought he knew about himself. Steph, he swallowed. His Adam's apple moved up and down like a stone being pushed through a narrow pipe. I owe you an apology. The words fell out of him like they had been locked inside a cage. I owe you more than that. I owe you. He could not finish. The sentence collapsed under its own weight. Vernon pressed both hands over his face and shook his head, back and forth, the way a man shakes his head when he is trying to shake loose from a nightmare and cannot. I am so sorry, he whispered. But the microphone on the podium was still live, and the whisper carried through the speakers and floated across the grand pavilion like a leaf falling on still water. I am so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't. His voice dissolved into a sound that was not a word, a choking, gasping sound. The sound of a grown man breaking down in front of 400 people and not caring who saw it, because the pain of what he had done was bigger than his pride. And that was when Steph Curry did the thing that no one in the room expected. He walked toward Vernon, not quickly, not slowly, just calmly, the way he did everything. He crossed the short distance between the floor and the stage. He climbed the 3 small steps. His white sneakers were quiet on the polished wood. He stood in front of Vernon Ashcroft, this man who had humiliated him, this man who had used his microphone and his stage and his power to make Steph feel small in front of hundreds of strangers, this man who had measured a human being by the fabric on his body and found him lacking. Steph looked at Vernon. Vernon looked at Steph, and Steph did not yell. He did not lecture. He did not deliver a speech about respect or kindness or the dangers of judging a book by its cover. He did not say a single word. He just opened his arms and he hugged Vernon Ashcroft right there on the stage, under the crystal chandeliers and the silk draped ceiling and the soft amber glow of the candles. A man in a gray hoodie and white sneakers wrapped his arms around a man in a $10,000 tuxedo and held him. Not briefly. Not the quick back patting hug that men give each other when they are afraid of showing too much feeling. A real hug. The kind that lasts long enough for the other person to feel it. The kind that says, without words, I forgive you. I see you. You made a mistake. It's okay. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do next. Vernon's body shook. His face was buried in Steph's shoulder, in the fabric of the gray hoodie that still smelled faintly of hospital soap, and he cried the way he had not cried since he was a boy, openly, loudly, without restraint. And Steph held him. The room shattered, not the chandeliers, not the glasses, not the marble floor. The room shattered the way ice shatters when the spring comes, the way walls shatter when the truth is bigger than the walls can hold. People stood up, not because someone told them to, not because it was polite, because their bodies could not remain seated, because what they were witnessing demanded that they rise. Marcelina Voss stood first, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed together in front of her chest, then Idris. Then Ogechi, who stood slowly because her knees were not what they used to be, but stood all the same because some moments require you to be on your feet. Then Franklin Cho, then Cornelius Whitmore, then Kenji Hayashi, then Genevieve Hatfield, then Roman Felsted. Table by table, chair by chair, the entire grand pavilion rose. 412 people standing in a ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco on a cool Saturday night in October, watching a man in a hoodie hold a man in a tuxedo on a stage, and understanding, maybe for the first time in their lives, maybe for just this one shining moment before the world rushed back in, that kindness is the only thing worth wearing. Someone began to clap. It was impossible to tell who started it. It might have been the waiter who had pressed his forehead against the wall. It might have been Priya, standing at the back with mascara running down both cheeks. It might have been Ogechi, whose weathered hands had applauded thousands of children at dozens of graduations over 3 decades. It didn't matter who started it, because within seconds the entire room was applauding. Not the polite, measured applause of a gala audience appreciating a witty speech. This was something else. This was thunder. This was 400 people pouring every ounce of emotion they had, the shame, the wonder, the sorrow, the gratitude, the love, into the only physical act available to them. They clapped until their palms burned. They clapped until the chandeliers trembled. They clapped until the sound rose through the silk ceiling and the plaster above it and the roof beyond that and sailed into the night sky above San Francisco like a prayer that did not need words. And on that stage, in the center of that thunder, Steph Curry held Vernon Ashcroft and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. So the applause lasted 4 full minutes. 4 minutes. In a world that moves at the speed of a swipe, where attention spans last less than the time it takes to boil water, 412 people stood on their feet and clapped for 4 unbroken minutes. When the sound finally faded, when the last pair of hands went still, and the room settled back into its chairs, something remarkable happened. People started reaching for their checkbooks, not because Vernon asked them to. Vernon had not spoken since the hug. He had returned to his chair at the side of the stage and sat down and stared at his hands like a man who had just woken up from a very long sleep and was seeing the world for the first time. They gave because they wanted to give, because something inside them had been unlocked by a man in a hoodie and a story about a boy in room 314. Franklin Cho stood up at table 3. He did not raise his paddle. He did not wait for an auctioneer to call on him. He simply said, in a clear, steady voice that carried across the quiet room, $250,000 for the meal program. And I'd like an additional $50,000 directed to UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital Pediatric Oncology Wing in Tobias's name. He sat down. He did not look at anyone. He did not wait for applause. Before the room could react, Genevieve Hatfield stood at table 4. $100,000 for Tobias's medical bills, whatever his family needs.
Then Kenji Hayashi.
75,000. Then a woman named Beatrix Langford, who owned a vineyard in Napa Valley and had said almost nothing all evening, rose at table 14. She was 71 years old. She wore a simple black dress and a single strand of pearls. Her voice was quiet but firm, the voice of a woman who had buried a grandchild 3 years ago and understood, better than almost anyone in this room, what Raylan Keene was feeling tonight. $100,000, Beatrix said, specifically for Tobias's family, for whatever they need. Medical bills, housing, food, anything, for as long as they need it. She sat down and pressed her hand against her heart and closed her eyes. The donations kept coming, table after table, voice after voice. 15,000 here, 30,000 there. Numbers that would have been headlines on their own, falling like rain, one after another, so fast that Priya could barely keep track on her clipboard. And then Vernon stood. He had been sitting on that chair at the edge of the stage for nearly 20 minutes, silent, still. His tuxedo jacket hung open. His bow tie dangled loose. His eyes were red and raw and emptied of everything except one thing: purpose. He walked to the podium. He did not pick up the microphone. He did not need it. The room was so quiet that a whisper would have reached the back wall. $1 million, Vernon said. His voice did not crack this time. It was not strong exactly, but it was clear. The way a sky is clear after a storm, washed, scrubbed, made new by the thing that had broken it. $1 million, matching Steph's donation, every cent to the meal program. He paused. He looked at Steph, who was standing near table 1 with his hands in the pocket of his hoodie. And I'm resigning as host of this gala. Effective tonight. A murmur rippled through the room. Vernon raised his hand to quiet it. Someone else should lead this, someone who understands what this night is actually about. Because I spent 12 years on this stage thinking it was about me, thinking it was about the show and the spotlight, and it's a sound of my own name. And it took a man in a hoodie to show me that it was never about me. It was always about the kids. He looked at the photograph still glowing on the screen behind him. The children in the cafeteria, the boy with the missing teeth, the girl with the braids, the small, thin boy holding up his carton of milk. It was always about the kids. Vernon stepped away from the podium. He walked off the stage. He walked through the room, past the tables and the candles and the roses, and he walked directly to Steph Curry. He extended his hand. Steph took it. They did not shake hands the way businessmen shake hands, quickly and firmly, and with practiced smiles. They held hands for just a moment, the way two people hold hands when something has passed between them that is bigger than both of them. Then Vernon nodded once and walked out of the grand pavilion. The final count for the evening was announced 30 minutes later by Priya Chandrasekharan, who had wiped her face and straightened her clipboard and stepped onto the stage for the first time in 3 years of working for Vernon. Her voice shook, but she smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, tonight's total for the Bay Area Children's Hope benefit, she looked at the number on her clipboard. She had added it 3 times because she could not believe it the first two, $2.3 million. The room erupted, not in the polished, measured way that galas usually celebrate. In the real way, the messy way, the way people celebrate when something genuine has happened. Hugs and tears and laughter all mixed together like colors bleeding into each other on a wet canvas. $2.3 million, dollars, the largest single night total in the Gala's 12-year history. Enough to fund the Oakland Unified School District meal program for an entire year, enough to make sure that 36,000 children would sit down at a cafeteria table every morning and every afternoon and find food waiting for them. Enough to matter. The next morning, at 6 a.m., Tobias Keene was wheeled into surgery at Uxef Benioff Children's Hospital. His mother, Raylene, walked beside the gurney as far as the nurses would let her. She held his hand, she kissed his forehead, she told him she loved him, she told him she would be right here, she told him to be brave. Tobias looked up at her with those big brown eyes that Steph had described to a room full of strangers the night before. I'm not scared anymore, Mom, he said. Raylene bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. You're not? Mr. Curry said he'd be here when I wake up. And Mr. Curry doesn't break promises. He's the greatest shooter ever. Greatest shooters don't miss, Raylan laughed, the kind of laugh that is really a cry wearing a disguise. She squeezed his hand one more time, and then the double doors swung shut, and her son disappeared behind them, and she turned around and walked to the waiting room. She was not alone. Sitting in a plastic chair in the corner wearing the same gray hoodie, holding 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafeteria, was Steph Curry. He had driven straight from the gala. He had not gone home. He had not slept. He had sat in that waiting room all night, drinking bad coffee and reading old magazines and watching the clock on the wall tick toward morning. Because he had made a promise to a 9-year-old boy. And Steph Curry did not break promises. He stood when he saw Raylene. He handed her one of the coffees. She took it with both hands and held it against her chest, not drinking it, just letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Thank you, she whispered, for being here, for everything. Steph shook his head. He's the brave one, not me. They sat together. They did not talk much. They did not need to. They just sat in that waiting room with its fluorescent lights and its plastic chairs and its vending machine that hummed in the corner, and they waited. The surgery lasted 6 hours. 6 hours. 360 minutes. Each one longer than the last. Each one heavier than the last. Raylene drank her coffee. She paced. She sat. She paced again. She looked at her phone. She put it away. She picked it up. She put it away again. Steph sat still. His hands were folded in his lap. His eyes were closed, but he was not sleeping. He was doing what Ogechi Amechi had been doing at table 10 the night before. He was praying. At 12:07 p.m., the double doors opened. A surgeon walked out. A tall woman with tired eyes and a green surgical cap and a mask pulled down around her chin. Her name was Dr. Priscilla Onweem. She had been operating on children for 19 years. She had delivered news like this hundreds of times. Good news and bad news and everything in between. Raylene stood up so fast her coffee cup fell to the floor. Brown liquid splashed across the white linoleum. She did not notice. Steph stood beside her. Dr. Onweem looked at them both. She took a breath, and then she smiled. He did great, she said. The tumor margins are clean. We got it all. He's going to be okay. He's going to be just fine. Raylene's knees buckled. Steph caught her. He held her up the way he had held Vernon up the night before, the way he held everything, gently, firmly, like it mattered. Raylene sobbed into his shoulder. Great, heaving, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Not sad sobs, the kind that come when the worst thing you have ever imagined does not happen. The kind that come when the world, which has been so dark for so long, suddenly cracks open and lets the lights pour in. He's okay, Raylene kept saying, over and over, like a song she could not stop singing. He's okay, my baby's okay. Steph held her and closed his eyes and let his own tears fall. Because some tears are not about sadness. Some tears are about relief so deep and gratitude so vast that the body cannot hold it, and it spills over, warm and unstoppable, like a river finding the sea. Tobias woke up at 3:40 p.m. The room was quiet. The machines beeped softly. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the window and fell across the Golden State Warriors blanket in warm golden stripes. He blinked. His vision was blurry. His body felt strange and heavy and far away, like it belonged to someone else. He turned his head slowly on the pillow. His mother was there, asleep in the chair beside his bed. Her hand was resting on the mattress near his arm, her fingers curled loosely around a crumpled tissue. And in the other chair, the one near the window, also asleep, with his head tilted back against the wall, and his white sneakers crossed at the ankles, and his gray hoodie bunched up around his shoulders, was Steph Curry. He had stayed, just like he promised. Tobias looked at the poster on his wall, the poster of number 30, arms raised, ball arcing toward the basket, the crowd a blur of gold and blue behind him. Then he looked at the real Steph, sleeping, snoring softly. Here, Tobias smiled. A small, sleepy 9-year-old smile. The kind of smile that holds an entire universe inside it. The kind that says everything without saying a word. He reached over and gently, so gently, that it was barely more than a whisper of skin against skin, touched Steph's hand. Then he closed his eyes. And for the first time in 7 weeks, Tobias Keene fell asleep without being afraid. In the weeks that followed, Vernon Ashcroft kept his word. He resigned as host of the Gala. He recommended Priya Chandrasekaran as his replacement, and the board agreed unanimously. But Vernon did not disappear. He did something no one expected. He began volunteering at Oakland Unified Schools twice a week. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he showed up at 7 a.m. He put on a hairnet and an apron, and he served breakfast to children in the cafeteria. He did not wear a tuxedo. He wore jeans and a polo shirt and comfortable shoes that did not click on the floor. The first time a teacher asked him why he was doing it, Vernon paused with a serving spoon in his hand and a tray of scrambled eggs in front of him and looked out at the cafeteria full of children eating their breakfast, and he said, "Because a man in a hoodie taught me that you don't dress for the room. You dress for the reason you're in the room." He also began tutoring kids in math on Saturday mornings. He was not very good at it at first. His explanations were too complicated. His patience was too short, but he kept coming, week after week. And the kids who did not know that he was rich or famous or powerful liked him. They called him Mr. V. They drew him pictures. One girl, a 7-year-old named Destiny, made him a card out of construction paper that said, "Thank you for helping me with fractions." Vernon kept that card in his wallet for the rest of his life. As for Steph, he never spoke about that night publicly. Not once. He did not post about it on Instagram. He did not mention it in press conferences. He did not include it in interviews about his eat, learn, play, foundation, even though the foundation continued to do extraordinary work across Oakland and the Bay Area. When a journalist from the San Francisco Chronicle tracked down the story and called Steph's team for a comment, the response was a single sentence. It was a good night for the kids. That's what matters. But Raylene Keene told the story. She told it to nurses in the hallway. She told it to other parents in the waiting room. She told it to Tobias's teachers when he went back to school. She told it to her neighbors and her coworkers and her sister in Atlanta and her mother in Savannah and anyone, anywhere who would listen. She told it because she believed that the world needed to hear it. That in a time when people argued about everything and agreed on nothing, when kindness felt like a relic and cruelty felt like a sport, there was a man who drove from a hospital to a ballroom in a hoodie and gave $1 million to feed children he had never met. And when the man who mocked him broke down in shame, that same man hugged him. That's who Steph Curry is, Raylene would say, her eyes shining, her voice steady and sure. That's who he really is. Not the championships, not the three-pointers, not the MVP trophies. That man sat in a hospital waiting room all night for my son. That's who he is. And every night before bed, Tobias Keene would hold his signed basketball. He would look at the poster on his wall. He would pull his Warriors blanket up to his chin. And he would whisper the same words into the quiet dark of his room. "I woke up, Mr. Curry, just like you said, and that is the story of a man in a hoodie who silenced a room full of tuxedos. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with kindness. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching this from. Whether it is India, Nigeria, the Philippines, Brazil, London, New York, or a small town nobody has ever heard of, tell me where you are. I want to see how far the story travels. And if this video made you feel something, if it reminded you that kindness will always be louder than cruelty, then do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story like this one. Because the world has enough people like Vernon Ashcroft before that night. Let us be more like Vernon Ashcroft after it. Let us be more like Steph. Let us choose the kid every single time. Now click on the video on your screen right now because that story is just as powerful as this one. I will see you there.